us today. It's a beautiful day today. It's a little hot, but thanks for blessing us with the beautiful weather, letting us stay healthy throughout the week, um, giving us work, food, and everything we need, and let us know more about you, and just get closer to you, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Oh, good. Yeah, I think I'm gonna change the track on this a little bit since there's no ladies in here tonight with us. Um, Let me start out because I want to still talk about sexuality and about God creating sex and stuff like that a little bit, and then I wanted to kind of have a more of a freer discussion tonight, just to get all the topics and talk about a lot of minutia that I'll bring up as well too. But let me start out by asking you guys this question. How do you perceive how God looks at sex, just in general? How do you think God looks at sex? Or what was the reason that he created sex? Hey, Andrew.
Andrew.
I think this is a really helpful. So if we only have the boys, I think it'd be a good discussion. But why did God create sex, and how does he view sex? What do you guys think? Or you don't have to be like right or wrong, but what's your impression from growing up within the church or from the Korean family that you're in and stuff like that? Well, maybe I'll go back one step. This is a very practical question. Did your mom and dad ever talk to you about the birds and the bees? Did they have a sex talk with you? Let's start with Eugene.
No, they never had that.
Okay. Young and Yongho? Andrew?
Nope.
Here's what my mom told me before I went off to college when I was in high school. I'm not going to say it in Korean, but you can. She said, be careful about girls. That's what she said. And then she goes, it took me a long time to realize that what she meant is you're going to like fall into, like you can fall into temptation, and the girl, she was talking about women could be very conniving and then, get you caught up in their, web. And I was just like, huh, what? I was very naive at the time. So yeah, I didn't get the sex talk either. Not my dad and not my mom. So in Korean culture, within the Korean American church or the church in general, well, let's start with the Korean American church. What do you think is the perception that you get about sex in the Korean American church? No perception, or what perception? I'm gonna go backwards. Andrew.
From what I've experienced, it's kind of treated as something sacred, something intimate, and the whole idea of having sex after marriage is kind of like so commonplace that it kind of spans to majority of churches. So it doesn't really matter, in my opinion, which church you come from, because I feel like the opinion kind of falls into all their beliefs.
Do you think so you've been at Good Sam's church for a while, right? Like through high school and stuff like that. Do you think that you got a sense that it's a very good thing, or was it not very much discussed? Or I don't know your church. I mean, your church, how it was in that way. How about your perception of it, or from teachers or people who are leaders?
My take on it is that in Good Sam, at least, topics like, sex, drugs, or any other, seemingly uncomfortable issues weren't really talked about,
Okay.
So it's more of like, kind of like the PG-13 at worst.
Sure. Did you get a sense that from the church, I mean, without them really talking about it, that it was either taboo, or that it was something only that's supposed to be kind of more private, or something that was something, I don't know how to explain it. Was there a positive connotation to it or not? You feel like at least there was a positive connotation, or just no? No.
I think like you were saying, it being taboo, it's like implicitly taboo. So it's kind of like,
Okay.
something that we've never talked about. So it's kind of like,
Never, okay.
oh, so
No,
we
none of the
don't,
pastor. Okay, gotcha. That sounds good. I take it that's the similar for all three of you, all the rest of you guys. The Eugene, okay, from because you're on this. Okay. What do you think? And you may already guess what I might say, but what do you? How do you think that God sees sex? I'm gonna ask Young and Youngho since they're together. What do you think God sees?
That's a good question.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Repopulation.
How about you, Eugene? Okay, let's say that again.
Repopulation.
Okay, repopulation. So it's a way to procreate. It's a way to have the next generation. It's survival of the human race. Okay, gotcha. Young, you want to add something, or Eugene?
I mean, the only thing I could think about is roles. I think I said that last time too. I feel like he created because women have their own role and male have their own role.
Okay.
Yeah. Like
okay,
I guess differences to fill the gap. I don't know.
All right. You know what? If you ever have a chance, and if you're curious, you might. It's a poetic book, but Song of Solomon is really about love between a man and a woman, and the physical, romantic, erotic kind of love. And so let me read you some of the verses. This is not all the verses, but different verses that come out from different parts about how the Bible represents physical intimacy and love between two lovers or someone who's married. Here's one of the ones that comes out in Song of Solomon. This is in the very first chapter, verse 2. And this is the woman talking to her lover that she's in love with. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. That sounds like a lot of people when they're infatuated and they just met a girl or a guy, and we're talking about physical things here. And when you read the actual Hebrew, it's a lot more explicit. It's PG down in the English. In the Hebrew, it's talking about very, not just normal kissing that you would kiss your mom or your dad or, your sister or your brother, or that kind of a kissing. It's talking about, hickey-inducing kissing, okay? Something like that, right? That's the imagery that's being used, the language. Here's another one in Proverbs. Let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. Let her breast fill you at all times with delight. So God created women with breasts so that men would be attracted and find them attractive. Be intoxicated always in her love. There's another one, Proverbs 5 again. Drink water from your own well. In other words, don't cheat. Share your love only with your wife. Why spill the water of your springs in the street? Now, I'm not trying to be like graphic here, but the language that's being used poetically here is actually very graphic, okay? It's very NC-17, whatever. Why spill the waters of your springs in the street, having sex with just anyone? So you see the analogy that they're saying, right? And you should reserve it for yourselves, never share it with strangers. So there's a double entendre, not saying not only should your love, but we're not just talking about loving, but they're talking about the physical act and all of that, okay? And so when you read the Bible, what you find is God is not some kind of like prude. I mean, think about it. God created, right? And if you know the mechanics of sexuality, there is pleasure with it, and there's orgasm, and there's procreation. And it's very narrow-minded to think that it is only about having children. Can you imagine? Husband and wife, you get married. Okay, honey, I think we need to have children. Okay, so for the next 3 days at 7 o'clock, we'll have sex for 5 minutes, and then hopefully we'll get pregnant. And then afterwards, she's pregnant, and you're like, okay, phew, now until we want our next child, we'll, no. And here's the thing that I've learned from me, of course, being married and stuff like that. I'm going to give you some pragmatic examples of it. But by God's grace, and I don't want to go too in depth, but not because I'm embarrassed or whatever, but it's not necessarily whatever, but yeah, I had girlfriends in the past. And I have actually kissed. But when I became a Christian when I was 18, I thought, you know what? I think I'm gonna have a very hard time controlling myself if I have a steady girlfriend and things like that. And so I made a commitment to myself and to my, a couple of my friends. I said, you know what? I'm gonna abstain from kissing. The farthest I'll go is holding hands. And from 18 to 29, I actually kept it amazingly. So it's not like you don't know how to kiss if you don't kiss in your 20s, okay? Just telling you from my, And so my wife, when I asked her to marry me, and she, of course, she already knew, and I gave her the ring, and that was the first time that we kissed. And then we were engaged for 5 months before we actually, got married in the set date. And the 5 months couldn't come soon enough because both of us physically wanted to become more intimate. Okay, so I've seen this with a lot of couples I've counseled, where it's not just the guy, but the woman too as well. When they're really in love and then they're engaged, and so sometimes they ask me, is it, how far can we go when we're engaged? And I'm like, you know what? You've waited till now. Wait until you get married. Just wait. It's like opening the Christmas. Anyway, I don't want to make bad analogies. And so my wife and I, we started getting more physical as we were engaged. And I don't want to go all in depth on it, but we didn't have intercourse or anything like that. But then I realized, oh my gosh, I could see why so many people fail in this and fall down in this. But she and I were very grateful that we, drew the line and waited. And we didn't know what the heck we were doing the first, whatever, during our honeymoon, etc. But it does not take fun. It does not take a lot of experience to, figure all that. And it's fun. Just telling you. And there's all of that you can explore brand new together. And the thing that I think I grew up with within the Korean American church and within my Korean American family was this, that sex is not dirty, but it's something that's not beautiful or celebratory. There wasn't a positive, it wasn't negative, but it wasn't a positive sign. And for me, what I want people to know is it's not watching some, it's not doing some dirty deed that whatever, but the Hollywood is the opposite. It's like, they just jump into bed. It's like Tinder or whatever they use nowadays, and they just do hookups and stuff like that. And that's not right either. The way I think God views sex, just by the fact that he created it and he created it to be pleasurable, is that he said, oh, have I got a gift for you? Have I got a gift for you? And there's a certain context where that gift, when it's open in that certain context, is going to blow your mind. But if you don't do it in the right way, it's going to leave issues and scars in your heart and in your spouse's heart. And you know what really saddens me? Because I have scars in my own heart. A lot of Christian women have less, but for me, it wasn't because of sexual activity, but it was because, like I told you before, like Playboy magazine or whatever else I was exposed to and that kind of stuff. In my growing up, in my teens and in my college years, pornography was not as prevalent or easily accessible. There was no internet, right? So, it wasn't available. And you'd actually have to go down to those like adult bookstores. I don't think they even exist anymore, but you know what I'm saying? XXX, seedy part of town. And who'd want to go there, right? I mean, it's just like, it would already, like if you had to go buy drugs, I'm just saying, you'd rather buy it, this sounds horrible, but you'd rather buy it from someone, like in your dorm room or somebody, rather than have to go downtown to that part of town where crazy stuff is happening, right? And so that kept a lot of Christians and a lot of guys from going and exploring that kind of stuff. Why? But now it's too easy. But the problem is even the the magazines and the imageries that I had from when I was in my teens and in my college years affected me. You know why? When I married my wife, she's beautiful, but she doesn't have the physical attributes that you see in those magazines. So what happens? You have this imagery that's in your brain that's not real, that's now being compared. And so you almost have to literally deprogram yourself to be able to enjoy. Statistically, this is a sad truth. I heard, I forgot the exact statistics, but I was researching it before. And your generation and the younger generation now has the highest level of impotence of any generation. Healthy 22, 23, 24, 25-year-olds are having impotence once they get married. They can't have an erection. They can't have an orgasm with their wife after they get married. And statistically, the studies are showing because they have, it's more of a mental psychological thing from all the pornography or maybe previous sexual partners or all the masturbation or whatever else that's caused them to have this scar. Can you imagine how sad it would be if you were making love with your wife and she's thinking about somebody else and you're thinking about somebody else? God created it to be incredibly beautiful, but our society, and Satan loves this, he's taken it and he's kind of messed with our mind. He's taken it to make something that's beautiful and good, and he's ripped it apart. Now, here's the thing that I've learned in my own experience, and then I'll share with you guys, and we can talk about it a little bit more. When I was dating my wife, and I had dated other women before and stuff like that, but for me, my dating process is she someone I can marry? If she's not a Christian, and I found that out, I wouldn't even date her. This is after I became a Christian in my when I was in my 20s and stuff like that. And the second thing is if I felt like I don't think this is someone I should marry, then I would break up with them. I wouldn't just continue dating them just to date them. Or they dumped me even before we got to that stage because they won't. Then I'll be like, okay. And so for amazingly till I got married when I was 31, but I met my wife when I was 29. And during our time of dating, amazingly, I didn't have a lot of emotional and relational scars because my mom was always mad at me because she goes, you never date anybody longer for like than 2 or 3 months. And my friends was like, oh, you're too picky. And I said, I don't think so. I think I have a certain, for the people who have like long, several 2-3 year relationships in their life, that may sound like it's healthy, but why are you still in it when you're eventually going to break up? I'm telling you the real, straight up real reason why. Often it's because they're already engaged in sex and that's still pulling them back together. They're addicted to that or they're enjoying that. And then if you're a guy that's a little bit, has a sense of chivalry or responsibility, you feel like, oh my gosh, I slept with her. So, maybe I should take responsibility, right? I know that's kind of old fashioned sounding, but there's a lot of people like that too. And so fortunately, somehow I avoided all of that. And as a result, but my issue was this imagery and the stuff that I had from when I was in high school and college, right? And masturbation from that kind of stuff. And so my wife and I had a long talk, and I told her all about this when we were engaged, when we were dating and we were engaged and stuff like that. And so we were able to work through a lot of that. And we even actually talked with our pre-marriage counselor to help. And he said that was common, but he's so glad that we were working on those things. But it was my issue to work out. For her, she didn't have any of those kinds of issues. And so for her, and this is what was sad, she would say, she was beautiful. I fell in love with her. I found her very attractive, all these things. She said, sometimes I wonder if I can compete with whatever images you have in your mind, or if you're actually with me or thinking about somebody else. And I said, no, and so that's the hard part. How sad is that? Okay, so keep that in mind. And so the way I think of, and the way I think that God created sexuality, it says And the Bible says in Genesis, and the two shall leave their mom and their dad, their different families. They will become one flesh. Why does it not say one spirit or one soul or one heart? It says one flesh. There's something in physical intercourse that unites you beyond. And so when my wife in our sex life, and you have to work on it, you have to figure things out, you have to communicate. In the beginning, you might be a little embarrassed and whatever else and whatnot. But what ended up happening is that we ended up enjoying it a lot more. And I eventually got to the place where I realized, oh, you know what? It's so secure because she's free with me and I'm free with her. Now, I'm not trying to get gross here, okay? But I remember after our honeymoon and we got married and stuff like that, can you ever imagine? Okay, this sounds weird, but like I'm taking a poo, number 2 in the bathroom. But I don't lock the door. It was just me and my wife. And she would come in and I'd be like, oh, I'm taking a dump. And I wouldn't be embarrassed. And she'd be like, it's okay. It doesn't smell that bad. And she'd brush her teeth. Now, I'm not saying that's normal. Some women will never do that. But my wife and I, we kind of came to the place where we're like, we just walk in on each other in the bathroom, whatever. And it was fine. I'm not saying that's normal or natural for everyone, but for us, it was a thing like, this is just what life is. And we're okay with it. Now, some women go like, no, I don't want to see you to see me. And like, for me, it was not a big deal. For her, it was not a big deal. And it was interesting because I felt so free to be myself and just open and share with her, what I like or what I didn't like, and her vice versa. And it was just so cool in that way. But see, physical intimacy, it links you in some spiritual, emotional way as well. And I think every time you have sexual relationship with someone, it links you in some way, spiritually, emotionally. So I want you guys just to keep that in mind. Number one, I want to tell you guys this. It is a beautiful thing, but we are not able to kind of enjoy it right now. Where, our whole attributes about those things are kind of messed up. And so what I want to encourage you guys is this, and to this day, I have an accounting, I'm not married right now, right? Obviously the last 7 years. And so I have an accountability partner. I have a brother, a Christian brother, not a physical brother, who keeps me, and we keep each other accountable so that we don't mess up. So we don't get tempted by pornography or anything else like that, because it just pops up. I'm 55 years old, but I know that stuff affects me. But the only way to keep it is that when I know I have to share with my brother, on a weekly basis, if I messed up or done anything. And so that keeps me from doing that accountability. And I'm going to tell you, I know this, and you don't have to say anything else, but I know every guy, at least every guy I've ever spoken to, shared with me, it's just the way that we're built. And so we need to battle it. We need to overcome it. And so I just want to encourage you guys along that line. Now, here's the other part about freedom in when you're in marriage. I remember I used to get a lot of questions when people thought, oh, that pastor was talking about sex, he'll talk about anything. And, we used to have like retreats where we'd be with our college and young adult, and we'd have a panel of married couples, married pastors, and they would write any question that they want about sex, about this and that. And so we would try to answer them. But I remember a lot of the questions, okay, and this is reason, there's a reason why I'm saying this. We're talking about, is it okay to do this sex act or that sex act? And I said, you know what? The reason why you guys are asking these questions is because a lot of you have heard or read or seen, right? And you think that that's going to be pleasurable or enjoyable. And I'm telling you this, sex is the most enjoyable when it's this way. The husband tries his utmost to do everything to please, emotionally, get her ready, and physically, and whatever, wine and dine her, romanticize her. It's not like, honey, I just want you in bed right now. Even when you're married, I would romance her. And then for her, she's also trying to please. And so I said, the different sex acts and whatever else, sexual, variety, God doesn't condemn within marriage hardly. I can't see anything. And so what it is that in that, as you begin to match each other and figure out what you like, or both of you like or dislike, then that's what happens. And I said, so don't ask the questions about the specific things, because I don't think any of that, quote unquote, has to be sinful or not sinful. But if she doesn't like it, then it should be okay with you. And if you don't like it, it should be okay with her. But at the same time, you're wanting to do things in order to enjoy it. For example, I'll give you a different example. If my wife loved to play tennis, but I'm not really a good tennis player, I'd rather play basketball. But in order to have a relationship with her, and always wants me to play tennis with her, I'm going to learn and at least become competent in it. Doesn't mean I'm always going to play tennis with her and never play basketball, but at least it means that I'm going to meet her somewhere where it's not like going to drive me nuts or crazy. Does that make sense? And your wife also will accommodate you. Like for me, I liked my wife to have longer hair when she was younger. And so, you know, even though it was a pain, she said sometimes, she said, no, if you like longer hair, I'll keep it long. Do you see how those kinds of things would happen? But I would say, you can cut it short if you want to. So there's this kind of like wanting to satisfy, please. And then when you do that, then both of your needs get really met. So those are some of the things that I just want to kind of change your conception of it. And I want you to make sure that you understand that in the context of marriage, there's such freedom. That's why I love in Genesis where it says the man and his wife were naked and they were not ashamed. Every K-drama and all these dramatic movies and all these things, you know what it's always, the tension comes from? It's from someone keeping information from the other person or whatever, because they're like, oh, I don't want to hurt them, so I'm not going to tell them this. And then they find out they feel betrayed. In the ideal marriage, it's where you can be freely yourself and express and not fear rejection. Can you imagine a marriage like that? Everything's good. For me, I loved hanging out with my wife. Now, I didn't hang out with her at 27. That doesn't mean she didn't go hang out with her friends and I didn't hang out with my friends. But when we spent time, we would just talk and laugh and enjoy it. Now, we had to work on it. There's times we would fight too and argue too. But it was good. And it wasn't perfect, but it was good. Questions, thoughts, comments? I want to kind of have a more of an open discussion, stuff like that too. And so, yeah, go, Young.
I mean, just one random thing that popped in my head recently. I could see why the Bible is telling people to have sex after marriage. Because once you hold it for a really long time, you know, even though you wanted, you resisted, and then you waited all the way, you know, till the marriage, then I feel like it's going to be a lot more valuable, you know, a lot more, you know, precious. Yeah.
Sure. Well, I mean, I totally agree with you on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's another part of it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's another part of it too that I always tell people. I always say things like this, you know, how amazing it would be for your wife to say to you on your wedding night, I've never kissed anyone. And I'm not, okay, I'm getting a little extreme, but I've never had sex with anyone. I've saved it all just for you. And you can say the same thing. Now, sometimes we're already beyond that point. Okay. But I believe that if you make a mark and then you say, and you can tell me, or you can tell a brother, you know what, you should even write it down. Today, I make a commitment to become pure and, you know, confess everything. And today's my D-Day where I'm going to start, like Alcoholics Anonymous or whatever, and say, I'm going to keep myself pure for my wife. And then on that day, when you get married, you say, honey, I screwed up in these things and I didn't know. But at that time, when I found out, I committed to God and my brothers helped me. And from this day, you know, April 28th, 2021, until the day we got married, I stopped because I wanted it all to be for you. Now, why do you think God created marriage and sex and all these things? Because he wanted it to reflect the commitment in our relationship. If you look at the Old Testament, whenever Israel disobeys God and worships idols, do you know what the analogy is used by God about what does he call the Israelites? He calls them a she, but what does he call her? Someone who's what? Cheating on him. An adulterous nation. That's what he calls it. Did you know that? And so God says, I want to just be you and me, just to be committed fully just to one another. No false gods. There's a prophet, a book in the Bible called Hosea. Do any of you guys know about Hosea? Hosea. So there's a prophet named Hosea, and the whole book is about God says, Hosea, and this is when Israel was worshiping idols, says, go take for yourself an immoral wife, basically a loose prostitute kind of wife, and marry her. And he said, but Lord, I haven't done anything wrong. Why should I do? And it says, because I want you to show what I am like to the nation of Israel. And then she goes and cheats on him again after he marries her. And he says, go and bring her back and don't divorce her and marry her and keep her back and restore her to her household. And he said, but Lord, she cheated on me. And he says, no, I'm going to show you what God the Father is like to the cheating nation of Israel. In other words, we're sinners, right? And so God's going to show us, and God demonstrates through the prophet, and he makes the prophet continuously pursue this woman who continuously cheats on him. How devastating would that be? See, you can start understanding about cheating, and then you can see why this adultery thing is such a crazy thing. I think all of you only want to be married once, right? It's not like, oh, let's get married and then let's have a contract for 5 years, and then after that we'll dissolve it and you can go find someone else and I can go find someone else. We're really not built that way. We're really not. And here's a statistic that I also know is that, and I've counseled a lot of couples, and some of them got divorced and some of them didn't. But when they get divorced, it's a higher percentage chance that they're going to get divorced again than the initial people who got married the first time. It's very sobering stuff. And here's the thing I want to tell you about marriage and about sexuality and all these things. It requires work, but it is so worth it. And if you preserve and prepare yourself as a right vessel, it will be something. Sex is a part of it. It's actually for me, when I'm counseling people who are in marriage and having difficulties, two biggest problems that come up. Number one, what can you guys imagine what it was that they fight about the most? Money. Number two, what did they fight about the most afterwards? We're talking about people without children.
Laundry.
Well, number one is money. But from my personal counseling experience, the number two part is she or he doesn't treat me or love me like when we were dating before we got married. I don't feel special anymore.
That's too much to ask.
Do you know a lot of men, you know how they view marriage? Is it the beginning or the end?
End.
You know what we look at is, I got my fish. It's the end of fishing. For women, what do they look at? It's the beginning of the journey. There's a lot of effort that needs to happen in marriage. And I'm going to tell you something. Forget about sex, but if you romance your wife and you treat her well and you love her and you dote on her, I tell you this to all the guys that are saying, my wife doesn't want to sleep with me, and I'm a guy and I have all these needs. And I'm like, are you romancing her? Are you, doing all those little notes? And then we do that for about a month, and he's like, oh, our sex problem's all cleared up. because women are built differently. For men, they'd be like, have a big old fight with their wife, and then their wife walks out of the shower and they're like, oh honey, let's go to bed. I'm serious. I've heard stories like that from people. And she's like, what are you crazy? Because like then she just feels like a piece of meat. Do you see what I'm getting at? And so there's all these dynamics that we have to understand. There's a book by a guy named, I forgot his name, Gary Chapman, called The 5 Love Languages. And I don't know if it's, but I like it. So it talks about gifts as a love language, physical affection, words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service. Those are the 5 love languages. And you have to figure out what combination of love, the way that, like some people, if you give them a hug, they don't feel loved. But if you give them a act of service or quality time, that's how they feel like. For me and my wife, both of us, we're very physical, touchy. So that was one of our love languages that was very much in common. So I remember when I was first married to her, we were at a large Korean American first generation church. And people used to always comment because we would always hold hands at church and stuff like that when we first got married. And because we were talking about it, I said, are we going to hold hands at church like we do everywhere else, or are we not going to do it at church? And I said, you know what? Let's be ourselves. And then sometimes, she would go teach Sunday school, or I'll go preach, and I'll give her a peck on the cheek. And all the, English ministry and then youth kids, and they're like, oh, ooh. And then all the other KM pastors and the Samaritan will always make a comment, go, oh, Moksen, you're such a romantic. I'm like, no, that's not, it's just because that was our love language. If she didn't want it, then I wouldn't have done it. And that would have been okay too. And then she was also quality time. And for me, it was words of affirmation. So when we learned these things, then she would really encourage me a lot. She said, oh, I enjoyed your sermon, or, that was really well done. And for me, I would spend quality time with her. I would say, hey, honey, I've got this whole block of time. Let's go do whatever you want. And let's just go to the coffee shop. Let's go to the bookstore. And let's just sit together and talk about everything. So when you speak their love language, the problem is if you have gifts, you tend to give gifts. If you like physical touch, you tend to touch and think everybody else does. If you like quality time, you try to give quality time. So here's the secret for all you studs out there. When you meet a girl and you want her to really, wow, this guy, I really like him, then you got to figure out her love language and you give that. You don't just give roses to every girl, whether she likes it or not. You got to figure out what her love language is. And if you can speak that and you figure that out, then they're already like, my gosh, this guy knows me. You're already in, Do not use this for evil, okay? Don't use Pastor James's stuff for evil, okay? That's just a joke. But yeah, it's funny because, as I'm getting older and older and I see all these things, I'm like, oh my gosh, if I had some of this stuff and knowledge and maturity when I was younger, oh, I could have messed. If I wasn't a Christian, I could have done bad things, like mess with people and stuff like that. But we want to use it to love, to care, and to encourage. You know what my greatest joy is? Oh, in Ephesians, I think it's chapter 5. And this, every time I do a wedding, I only preach one sermon. Not because I'm lazy, but because I think it's the most. In Ephesians chapter 5, it says this. Wives, what? You guys know this famous passage. I'm sure you heard it somewhere. Wives, something your husband. They don't like it sometimes. What does it say?
Sure.
Wives, starts with O.
Obey.
Obey your husbands. Husbands, obey your wives. No, it says husbands, love your wives. And I thought about that really carefully over the last 20, 30 years. You know what it means? In general, not always, but in general. Andrew, let me ask you, let me pick on you. Let's say you had a son, okay? And he's 16 years old. He's 21 years old, just done with college. You're my age, okay? And your grown-up son comes to you. And I'm sure you'll appreciate it if your grown-up sons come to you and say, Dad, I love you, and give you a hug, right? But he was always like, Dad, I love you. Let me give you a kiss. Oh. Or Would you rather say, Dad, you know what? You are such a great model for me and mentor for me. I really respect you. And I really honor you. And I thank you for being, I know you made mistakes, but I honor you for, what would you actually want to hear more from your son?
Um,
I know both, but if you
yeah,
had
both
both, what would be priority?
priority.
No, what would make you feel more like, oh, that really makes me feel like I did a good job?
Uh,
It's tough, huh?
He's this one.
I'd say words.
Okay. The reason why I'm pointing this out is when I ask this question to women and they go like, Mom, I honor you so much. You are a good mom. You cooked well and all this kind of stuff like that, right? And I respect you. Moms are like, oh, okay. But if you say, Mom, I love you so much. And you know how flowery Mother's Day cards are. That's what they want. What do women, what's their makeup desire? To be cherished and loved. What do guys want? We don't want to be cherished. Oh, you're so precious. No, we want to be honored. We want to be respected. So what the Bible is teaching us is to do what the other person in general needs, but we're not very good at doing. Think about your dads, right? If you went to your dad and said, let me give you a kiss, Dad, I love you, boys, right? And if your dad was around or whatever, you know, and I know it's the Korean culture, he'd be like, "Ay, chingaro," or something like that, and maybe jokingly, or I don't know, maybe your dads give you a hug. My dad did not hug, but I got him to hug before he passed. When we're both older, when I was in my 40s and when he was in his 60s. But with my mom, it was always easy. With my dad, I remember one talk I had. I said, Dad, I know that you loved us and love me, and even though you didn't show it, and I really honor and respect you for, being faithful to Mom and working hard and providing for us, even though you couldn't express. And you know what happened? He started crying because he didn't think I understood that stuff. And part of me, was thinking I wish he had showed more affection and verbal affection, but he didn't. But I realized that it wasn't part of his makeup or his cultural makeup. But anyway, so I'm digressing. But the point I'm trying to make is that God created us to kind of merge together, male and female, to complement physically, genetically, all these kinds of ways. And so if you learn to serve the other person according to their needs, and they do, and so my sermon on all that is like, if the wife says, forget about my needs, I'm going to meet all my husband's needs. And if the husband says, forget about my needs, I'm going to meet all my wife's needs. Do you know what happens? Both their needs ideally would get all met. Not by me, but by my spouse. Isn't that crazy? And that's the way it's supposed to be. But the problem is we get into marriages, and here's where the arguments and the marital counseling comes in. My wife doesn't do this. My husband doesn't do this. This is what I want from her or him, and she doesn't do it. And of course, there's a lot of other things that got to that place. And I'm not saying that they're saying something that's wrong. Okay. So I know this is digressing, but marriage and sexuality, all of this, God wanted us just to enjoy it so much. And he created us in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, to just enjoy this. Look, here's what God gave the command from Adam and Eve to do. Not to garden, not to work. He said, be fruitful and multiply and steward. Basically he said, hey, take care of this beautiful Garden of Eden property I'm going to give you, and have lots of sex and have lots of kids and grow a big, beautiful family. Sounds like a honeymoon to me, Garden of Eden. It's like going to Hawaii and having your own island and say, hey, you and your wife, you populate it and you start a city. Everything grows. The climate is mild. You don't need clothes. You don't need anything. God created it for us to have physical, emotional, spiritual pleasure and enjoyment. He loved us in that way, but we kind of messed it all up. but it will be that way once they get in heaven. And in case you're kind of wondering, no, there's no sex in heaven. The Bible actually makes that pretty clear. But I think what's going to happen is we're going to have such a depth of relationship with people, with all of our brothers and sisters and God, that we won't even think about it. We'll have so much enjoyment and pleasure and other things in other ways. Do you know that if you're married here on earth, in heaven, you will not be married to that person anymore? Because think about it. You know, I'm a widower. What if I got married again? Then who am I married to in heaven? It'll get pretty jacked up, right? And then I die, and then she marries somebody else. So the four of us have to live in one house? You know, it becomes weird, right? And so right now, this is supposed to teach us spiritual truths and in a way that we can grow. And it teaches the mystery about the church and Christ as well. Go, Young-ho.
So, if that happens, are you not supposed to like get married again? Is that not right? Under
No, you can get married again. Why not?
Okay.
So the thing is our idea of marriage and love is like this. We watch all those hyper romantic movies or books where it says, I love you so much that even death can't separate us and we're going to love each other for all eternity, right? But actually, this is a reflection of how intimate and in relationship with God and one another we're going to be. And it's going to transcend even the physical things. The physical things are now in heaven. I don't know. I mean, I have a whole book on heaven, but it does mention about eating, right? Because Jesus says, I will not drink of this cup or eat of this food until I eat with you and drink with you again in heaven. Jesus actually literally says that. So that at least there's one meal of wine and bread.
Nice.
But does that mean then we poo or don't poo in heaven? I'm not trying to be gross. I'm just trying to, right? Can you be constipated and sick? No, it says no more tears, no more sickness, no more anything. So what's our new heavenly bodies going to be like?
Sick.
I don't know. It doesn't give us all the details, but my guess will be our bodies will not get tired very easily. Our minds will have full capacity. So whatever we learn, we'll remember. We won't have to like think, wow, what was that again? Or I don't get that. We'll understand everything, you know, fairly easily as God created us perfectly to be. We will be able to enjoy food. I don't know about the digestive process. I don't know about that kind of stuff. I'm not sure how that's going to happen. Do you remember when Jesus was risen again from the dead and they said, oh, it's a ghost. And he said, no, bring me some food. And he ate it in front of them after his resurrection because he had a physical body. So to me, it seems like we're going to be eating food in heaven and not getting fat and not getting whatever. And, you know, like my joke is we're all going to be 33. A day younger than Jesus, so he'll be the older brother no matter what, or whatever age he was. But if you died as a 12-year-old believing in God, you're not going to be in a 12-year-old body for all eternity. If you die as a 99-year-old, you're not going to have a 99-year-old body all the way through eternity, right? You're going to be at the peak, whatever the peak was. Personally, I think you know, because of whatever, my mom said she worked too much when she was pregnant with me. So she was she said she was sorry because I came out really small. So she thought I was supposed to be taller. So I always joked to her, I was like, don't worry, Mom, we'll figure out how tall I was supposed to be when we get to heaven, you know? So we'll see if it was or wasn't. And she's like, oh yeah, I never thought about that. And we joke about things like that. So some of you might end up being like way taller than you imagined. Or way shorter. I don't know. I mean, like some of those freakishly tall people and stuff like that. So yeah.
Not me. Not you.
Now, what? You have an ideal height now?
No, I think we're genetically,
Almost there?
yeah.
Well, I mean, think about some people who have birth defects or different physical ailments. They're not going to have those when they get to heaven. You know what I'm saying? So I think that what God originally created you to be before the fall is probably what you're gonna physically look like, you know. But who knows? We'll see. And we'll see the beauty and the amazing uniqueness of everybody. We'll definitely see that. Any more questions, or any questions about sex or masturbation, pornography, or if you actually do have some questions about like how far can I go, or why should and if I have, what can I do about, that kind of, or I don't know. I mean, I don't know what else. I'll give you a kind of well, no, I'll let you guys ask first. I'll give you a funny story to end at the end, but you want me to tell my funny story instead? I know it's not easy to open up, but I just hope that you guys feel free about it, because it's not something that I go out there and go, hey, let me tell everybody. But you guys are we're part of a church together. And honestly, I'm old enough to be your dad. And if no one else is, if you guys are saying, Pastor James, I fell in love with this girl, I think we want to get married, and we're going on this, I would want to give you advice. Don't make the mistakes I made. Here's the good things that I did. And maybe you've already made mistakes. Well, then I want you to talk to me. If you don't want to talk to me in public or with everybody else, but just then let's talk about it. Let's figure it out. But if you don't share, and if you don't ask questions, and you don't figure it out, then you realize when you get to that place and you get married and you're like, oh man, this is really hard. And that's the tragic part. I have about 4 or 5 people that I stay in contact to randomly. They call me once in a while and say, hey, Pastor James, here's the problem that I'm having. And I remember what you used to say, and I didn't listen. And here's the issues that I'm having. And I was like, hey, it wasn't me. It was the Bible. It was what God was saying. Now, all right, let's figure out what we can do from here. But it's difficult because now their wife is disillusioned and wants a divorce, or someone's cheated or something else like that. So the best offense is a defense. The best way to do is immunize, inoculate, prepare yourself so that you can have a great start. Can you imagine if Warren Buffett said, Andrew or Young or Eugene, I'm going to take you as my intern. I'm only going to pay you $10,000 a year, but I'm going to feed you and house you and teach you, and you can watch me doing everything. Who would not jump at that? I would do that for my financial knowledge. For 1 year, I would do that. Is there anybody here that wouldn't? I would.
I do it for free.
Yeah. I mean, as long as you're fed and housed some way, right? You can at least eat, I would clean his bathroom. I don't care.
Let's scrub his
Why? And I'm telling you, if you can figure some of this stuff out before, you're way ahead of the game. The problem is, after you're married and after you made mistakes and you're already in a committed relationship, in a covenant marriage, then trying to fix it. Take the car to the mechanic before you buy it used, not after. Because one, you can walk away from it, or the other, you're going to have to fix it and pay all the money. I don't know if that's a good analogy, but you get what I'm getting at. In other words, buyer beware. And I even counseled couples that came to me, and I talked with them, and they had a lot of issues. I said, you know what? I counsel you not to get married at this time. I'm not saying never, but deal with these issues before you get married. And sometimes they listened, and sometimes they don't. You know how hard it is for me to say that? You know how hard it is for them to push back their wedding plans? There was a couple that came to me a month before they set up everything, and they said, oh, Pastor James, would you do our wedding ceremony? I said, I don't do it without doing marriage counseling sessions. And they said, oh, we're going to get married no matter what. I'm all, okay, then you have to come to 4 sessions. And I made them come to them. And I said, after the 4th session, I don't think you guys have enough stuff worked out. And they were thinking, but now they felt pressured because all the deposits and everything were in, and they got married. And they just struggled like crazy. They just fought like a lot. So you know what? Really figure this stuff out. All right, here's the humorous story. So this is from the early 90s. Do you guys have any more questions? All right. And I give this to you guys again. I've heard it all. And so if you guys ever need to talk with me, feel free. Um, I'm pretty good at, the privacy thing, and I'm supposed to, legally and whatever else too. Okay, in the 90s, I think this was when I was engaged, even before I got married, maybe a couple years before. We were doing a youth retreat, and one of the things that we wanted to do was talk about sexuality and, get kids to kind of start, because, Korean church is so closed. And so we had the kids write down whatever questions that they wanted, and then we would try to answer as best we could. Sorry about this, but this is the one I just remember so vividly. It's just, sorry, it's a little off color and a little racy, but it's an actual thing that happened. But I love the naivete at the time. So one of the questions that came out, and I'm sure it was a boy that wrote it, and he said, in marriage, is it okay to have oral sex? That's what he wrote. So we read out the question. And these two junior high girls were high school freshman girls were sitting next to each other. And one turns to the other and goes, what's oral sex? And the other girl smacks her in the side back, and she goes, you're so stupid. It's that phone sex thing. And then we were just all starting to just laugh. And then we said, you know what? We're going to split the boys and the girls. And we sent them off because they weren't ready for that conversation. So it was just a really humorous kind of a thing. And I think, you know what? It's so nice. And it's not just about it. The thing is like the guy, I'm sure some boy or some girl that, wrote that question, maybe they had a real concern about it or whatnot. But I feel bad because if we can think about it in such a bigger context, and I don't want them to be naive and know nothing, but at the same time, I want them to understand that there's a beauty of it and not to be worried. It's not like, you need to have an advanced degree. It's something that God built into us that for us to enjoy. And when you really go by God's plan, you won't lose that. Yeah, Eugene, go.
So what was your answer?
For that?
Yeah.
You mean that specific question?
Right.
The way I said it is, if your wife and your husband, both of you are okay with it, there's no prohibition. In the Song of Solomon, I'm going to tell you, I studied that thing with a Hebrew scholar, and there's things in there that are very, very graphic. And I thought, wait a minute. You're joking me that this is actually what it means in Hebrews, but it's very graphic on sexual behavior in a very poetic way. So for husband and a wife, there are nothing that is off kilter in a husband and wife thing. But the thing is why do you want it? And is the other person okay with it? And that's all that there is. Does that make sense? Because I really feel like that whole thing about that part is that let's pretend we didn't have any pornography and any of that kind of stuff, and you weren't exposed to any of that, and you got married, and you're going to explore each other in a very healthy way. And guess what? A big part of the way God created us is, kissing. Who came up with the idea of kissing?
God.
Right. And so all of those things are there. And guess what? It is what it is. The problem is that now we use it for perversion instead of the right way. Or to say, hey, in order to avoid having sex with my boyfriend, I'm going to have oral sex, or the other way around, or whatever, And then go, we didn't have sex. Remember Bill Clinton? Sorry, I'm not trying to bring politics into it. I did not have sex with her. Because he's not considering other kinds of sex, right? But in the word itself, it has sex, So the way I look at it is, you can't say that you did that and then didn't have sex. It is part of it. But within a husband and wife relationship, I'm making a long yes answer to this. But the reason why I'm saying is if it's okay for the two of you in a very, natural kind of way, and there's no hangups. Let's say you don't have a hang up on it, but she does. Then you shouldn't force her or push her. Let's say she doesn't have a hang up on something, but you do. Then she shouldn't push you. But you got to figure out, why do you have those hang-ups? Right? And what is it? And there's a lot of things that come with it. And like I'm not going to tell you details, but for my wife and I, we felt very free. And there are certain things that we tried once or twice and then didn't, because I was like, whatever. One of the gifts that we received in our marriage, in our wedding, of course, it was her girlfriends, not my guy friends. They gave us a big fat Christian book about sexual positions and sexual whatever from a Christian couple sex therapist. And I'm like, are you sure? And like, we were like, and we're like, no. And the coolest thing is we just kind of just chilled and hung out and did things like that. No pressure, no nothing. And that's the beauty of where you want to go. And that's why I said before, this or that. Okay. You know what? If my wife and I were still married, we would have been married 23 years this year. Okay. That's quite a long time, right? That's like your ages and whatnot. Guess what? It's not about, okay, when you first get something, and have access to something, you just try everything just because you're going to try everything. But eventually you figure out what you enjoy. Like when you go to a restaurant that you really like the food, then you might try all the different dishes, right? But eventually you go like, no, these are my favorite. And even in our, let me see, she passed at 2000, even in our 15 years of marriage, we kind of came to but every once in a while you would still spice it up just for the heck of it. But it was pretty, we knew she knew what I liked and I knew what she liked and things like that. And it was just and it was funny because she's a quiet lady, and you would think like, pastor's wife wouldn't be, but no, and she would say, and she would counsel young ladies and people who are getting married and stuff like that and say, no, you're supposed to enjoy it and don't be so like prudish and uptight about it. It's marriage. It's in the context of marriage. God wants you to enjoy it. Enjoy it. Because like there was some people that were coming to us and the husband was like, she won't even take her clothes off in front of me. And she's like, oh, in the closet, changing her clothes and stuff like that. I'm all like, okay, she had some, this is an extreme one. She had some issues along that line. In our family, I have 2 girls, right? They're not listening right now, but both of them till like they were 8 or 9, they would come out of the bathroom or the shower and just run around naked. But our family didn't have a big prohibition against nudity within our own family. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like I'd be taking a shower and my daughter would run in and say, Daddy, I need something. And I'm like, oh, okay. Now at a certain age, of course, not that anymore, right? But there was not a big, we didn't just go walk around naked like a nudist calling all the time, but no, it wasn't as big of a deal within our family. And we kind of wanted our girls to know that. There's no, like in Korean culture, I remember, I'm not trying to knock down Korean culture, but there was such a prohibition against nudity. After a certain age, I never said that to my girls. What's embarrassing about the human body? God made it. It's beautiful. If you get what I'm saying. At the same time, we were very clear. You don't go hug, sit on the laps of uncles or strangers that you don't know, right? That aren't your family members or, really close family that we say, okay, you don't do those kind of things. You don't just go hug anybody or kiss anybody. In Korean churches and contexts, they go to a little girl, oh, po, 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 and they just met, right? Because they think they're cute. I said, no, you don't have to do that. Don't do it. So, we're teaching different kind of context, the world and its kind of brokenness, but also within our family, we said, we're very, but at the same time, we said the world is not like that. But here in our family, we're very, so I was hoping that my girls would not have hangups about, and we spoke about it. We taught them about like, where babies come from. We didn't do the stork stuff. We did the pregnancy and showed them the whole, and then how men and women have sex and stuff like that and things like that. I actually know a pastor who had a boy. I didn't have a boy, but when he started into puberty, my friend took him, like, I think it was like 11 or something, and then, because, he would always hang out with his son, and, they would get naked when they go to the locker and stuff like that together. And he went into the shower, and then he explained stuff to him about what was happening to his body and stuff like that. I thought that was kind of cool. Kind of weird for us Asians or Koreans. This is a white pastor, but anyway, I thought, oh, I never even thought about that, but that's what it was. I hope this kind of just frees you up. And I think you also need a cohort of brothers, if not literal brothers, but friends that you can kind of, because who is it that you can talk to everything about? Sometimes you can't do that with a woman. You just can't. Your mom or whatnot. And sometimes you don't have a dad or a dad figure or an uncle that you can do it with. Okay. Trust me, I've done this with all the deacon leaders in my church. We've dealt with this. Doesn't mean that they all have resolved it, but because I said, one thing I want to make sure is I want to, as much as possible, affair proof your marriages. And so every once in a while, I'm gonna ask you, how are you doing in those areas? And you should ask me as a single pastor as well. All right. That was it kind of worked out with just us guys tonight, but any other questions or thoughts about that? I want that to be a lot more practical for you guys and stuff. Any questions about what I think is Bible says about certain things, or what's right or wrong? Or if you think of things, and you can text me directly or DM me, or you can call me and we can chat about it and stuff like that. But I mean, I wish I had this kind of access. I would have asked, well, maybe probably on my own, but I would have asked lots of different questions and stuff. But yeah. All right, that's all I had. Okay, gentlemen. Wow, this one that's been recording. No, yeah, it's okay. I don't mind it. And even if the ladies listen to it, they'll listen to it and gain a different insight. So I think that'll be good. All right, that's it. Let me pray then, and then we'll wrap up. All right. Any last minute question? Last second? You're afraid of my answer being 10 minutes. Let's pray. Father, I want to thank you for giving us just some very clear teaching in your word about sexuality, because you know that it affects us in such a remarkable way, because you created us. And I pray that the young men here, you would just give them wisdom. You give them the courage to ask and to get help and to seek to be healthy in this area, to have the right ideas. Would you reformat? Would you refresh their minds and renew it so that it could be a clean slate where they really have a healthy understanding of marriage, of sexuality, of all the things that you want them to have, and take away all those things that have maybe scarred or hurt or messed them up in the past. And Lord, just renew them and let them make a commitment to you, to walk in you and with you, until they meet that woman, that person that they're going to share their whole life with and raise a family with. And it will be so healthy, so beautiful. It will reflect, that marriage will reflect your glory, and the kids will know you through the way that they love each other and serve each other. And that other people will say, wow, what a couple, and they'll be blessed and they'll lift up your name. We thank you. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Amen.
All right.